Back with another Q&A. Here we go. We're going to jump right in. So what is the timing of protein intake and the anabolic window, quote unquote anabolic window? So there's this thing that's kind of been perpetuated for a long time that there's like the ultimate time to time everything in your diet and your workout. I think workout's different, but when we're looking at diet, particularly like supplementation, if people spend $50 on a tub of protein, in this case, like I want to make sure I'm getting my $50 worth. So when exactly does this need to go in me so I get, every penny out of my 2 scoops of whey protein?
So I can extract maximum gains from this overpriced whey protein.
So there's this thing's been perpetuated that there's the ultimate time to do it, and you have to do it inside 45 minutes, as soon as you're done doing your resistance training, because if you don't, your gains are gone.
You're going catabolic.
Yeah, so
there's no reason to do the training you just did.
Body's going to eat itself.
Yeah, let's talk about it a little bit. It won't take long.
Okay, we laugh though, but who was really anal about that?
I was.
Yeah, I was.
Oh yeah,
for a while.
For sure.
I have a book on my shelf that's nutrient timing. It's literally all about like eating at this precise time to get optimal results.
I think that, like the overview statement is if you're an elite athlete, right, and you're a performance athlete and you are really, I guess, structured and have to be in order to get in multiple training sessions a day, get that recovery done, be ready for the next session or the next competition or whatever, timing becomes much more important.
Could matter more for you.
Could matter a lot more. But for most people, and that is the majority, even if you think you are, you're probably not in the most category. This is like majoring in the margins. Or majoring in the minors when we're talking about like timing of your nutrient intake. What's more important is you're just getting the proper nutrients, and I think you got to back up to that. But let's talk about this quote unquote anabolic window.
So I would say at this point it's pretty much a myth that the anabolic window, 45 minutes after your workout, you have to get in your protein shake immediately, or you lose out on the the muscle protein synthesis from that workout. You lose your gains. When in reality the answer is it depends. I would say if you are training fasted, say you are training at 10 a.m. and you woke up at 8 and you have not eaten, you train for an hour, it's now 11 o'clock and you have not eaten all day, it may be a little bit more important for you to get in not only protein, but carbohydrates as well within a shorter window or a smaller window after that workout. But if you're going into your workout fed and you do the same 1 hour workout, in my opinion, it's not necessary that you get in something immediately after the workout. What I've heard before is about 2 hours is probably a good idea to get in not just the protein, but again, the carbs as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting you just mentioned that. So this is about protein. They're asking about the anabolic window. If you really want to be anabolic, what you should be getting in is your carbohydrate, right? And that's, post-workout, post-intense workout. And I think there's a lot of research that supports that. Just in terms of the recovery time, some of the other like subjective feedback, like feeling more recovered, feeling higher energy levels or whatever, and getting that in immediately following within, 45 minutes of your workout. In fact, seems to me actually there's been quite a bit of things kind of coming across my feed, like some studies, some peer-reviewed stuff on carbohydrate intake after. But from the protein perspective, what's important is you're just getting it in, right? And
total intake throughout the day.
Intake throughout the day. Try to keep those protein or amino acid levels kind of regulated throughout the day. That is, don't let them get too high or don't let them get too low. So I think the thing with taking in the quote unquote protein shake, which in my opinion should also include some carbohydrate for the majority of the population, especially on the resistance training side, or particularly if you're on more of the intense endurance side of things, if you've been out for a long period of time, if you're into that, is getting both in immediately following. And I think the thing to think about here rather than an anabolic window is just how am I getting in all my nutrients throughout the day? It's a convenient time to do it because it's portable and it can be easily onboarded, post-workout, like if you're taking your shaker bottle to the gym or, you've got it, sitting in your kitchen cabinet before you get, or on your kitchen counter before you get into the shower after your workout or your bike ride or your run or whatever the hell it is you're doing out there. It's more of the convenience thing and the making sure you're getting everything that you need in at the same time. So the whole anabolic window, it is more or less a myth. Look, if you are, I would say this, there's going to be a camp out there that's going to go, no, you're wrong. And a lot of times that camp is also onboarding a lot of other things into their system, PEDs. And when you're starting to mess around with a lot of that stuff, because it works, and I get it. Like nutrient timing can be really important, especially if you're doing stuff, you're using like things like growth hormone and insulin, right? Nutrient timing is important, right? In terms of keeping things balanced. But again, a lot of this stuff that we talk about on the show in terms of myths or uncovering truths, I guess, comes from the bodybuilding world. And keep in mind, some of that stuff comes on board with that. They just don't tell you about that. So yeah, there really isn't an anabolic window. Just get it in. If it's convenient for you and it helps you get it in immediately following your workout and it makes you feel better, right? Like psychologically and emotionally, I can put it in then. But the important thing is you just get it in, right? And you try to keep those levels, effectively topped off for as much as you can throughout the day. So that goes along with all the other meals that you're eating throughout the day. All right, what are the pros and cons of 5x5 training? All right, so we actually covered this in depth on a podcast. It was quite some time ago now. We talked about what we really love about 5x5 training. So what are the pros and the cons? Well, first off, that question needs to be more clearly identified or qualified with, like, why are you doing this? Like, what are your goals? You'll find a lot of 5x5 training in strength and hypertrophy programs, and those that are coupled with like power training programs. And so the pros to the 5x5 really come down to the intensity that you're using in a lower volume of training. So a lot of workout programs will be somewhere in like the 8 to 12 rep range with regard to the prescribed sets and reps that you're doing in a workout. So if you kind of did some math here and you did like 3 sets of 10, right, or 8 to 12, and let's average it at 10, it's about 30 reps, right? Makes sense? Mm-hmm. So if we went to a 5x5, what we're talking about is 5 sets of 5 repetitions. That's 25 reps. So we're doing less volume, but because we're only trying to eke out those 5 reps at a high intensity, we can get more of a stimulus in that amount of time, right? Or in the same amount of time that we may be putting into that 3 sets of 8 to 12. And so you're going higher loads or higher intensity, right? And it's often defined by load, right? And you're able to go with, because you're only doing 5, or the goal is 5 rather than getting all the way to 10. So it's higher tension, it's more tension, shorter period of time with the recovery in between to be able to then knock out the next one. That is a pro.
Yeah, and I think like it allows people to, because I think a lot of people's training, they kind of tend to stay in those higher rep ranges. So it kind of forces you to go down to that lower rep range that a lot of people maybe haven't played with. And I think even a simpler point is that the program is actually really simple. It kind of brings a lot of people back to the basics. We've talked with nutrition and other things that like you can get lost in the weeds a lot. So even like there's some variations of like a true 5x5 program is where you literally hit like 5 of the big basic movements, compound movements, and you hit those for 5x5s, and like that's your whole training week. So I think one of the benefits is we can get lost in the sauce of all these like special exercises and special movements, ancillary stuff, which there is importance, which might be one of the cons of this, that there is places for those exercises. But one of the pros is it brings you back to like the basics and just focusing on working hard, which I think a lot of people with this whole like optimal train of especially like teenagers training, is they get way too caught up early in the like optimal and hitting like the the sternal fibers of the pec and versus all this kind of stuff versus like, hey, have you just
fundamentals?
Have you just the fundamentals, the mechanics, and actually like tried really hard for a while?
Right.
Like that's super simple to see that. But on the other end, to play devil's advocate with that, some of the negatives of this program is sometimes if you are really putting a lot of effort into like a heavy 5x5 programming, even let's just say you're just doing like your squats 5x5 today, but if you're doing them heavy enough for it to be an effective 5x5 program, sometimes you're looking and that's already been like an hour and a half. Yeah. Right. So it's like, okay, well, so where do I get into things, either like the ancillaries or the warm-ups or the other things that I do need to be getting in specifically for me or for my goals or accomplishing things? So that's where it can be kind of time consuming in some ways, even though it's like basic. So.
Yeah, because you need to recover enough to be able to do the next thing. Here's one of the downsides to it. I don't think it's for you if you don't have a good amount of intestinal fortitude.
Yeah.
Because the 5x5, if you're doing only 5 reps, those need to count.
Yes.
And I think you go back to like maybe those 3 or 4 sets of 8 to 12 or somewhere in there. What do those first 2 sets look like compared to the last 2 sets? Like, where were you in terms of your intensity level? By the time you're into your 5x5, that intensity needs to be at or above 80% of whatever your quote unquote 1 rep max is, right? That's where you're going to get the benefits from it. And that's hard. The other thing it's going to do is it's going to force you to really move and own that load. And if you're not doing that, you won't get the benefits out of it anyway. Exactly. But, if you're the good old fashioned back squat, you put that, you put 80% of your 1 rep max, right, on that barbell, and you get underneath it for five reps. That should be difficult. If it's not heavy enough, right? It's not 5 and I put it down. It's 5 good intense reps, right? Yeah. And that is, I'm getting to the end of that and I want to put it down. I don't have 2, 3, 4, 5 left in the tank. Yeah. Otherwise, you're not getting the benefit of the 5x5. So to your point, it's simple. It gives people direction, right? And it gets you into that intensity that you need to be at in order to, if applied properly, to give you the effective stimulus to build that strength, build that hypertrophy. I think one of the cons of it is like people are trying to do too much. So you don't have to do an entire workout of 5x5s. You mentioned that, like I'm picking, like today I'm going to try and do my squat, my deadlift, my bench press, and I'm going to do all these 5. I don't recommend that, right? Yeah. Because by the time you get to that last exercise or movement that you're doing, what you have in the tank isn't what you would have had in the tank if you started at the beginning. Yeah. It's not that you can't get benefit by that, but I think the key there is like you can use them throughout the week in your program. That's maybe where you start your workout, and then you move to more of the 8 to 12 rep ranges in some of your other movements that you've decided, because you will have less in the tank. You should. If you don't, you're not doing it appropriately. You didn't work hard enough, right? In that 5x5. So that's when you can move to your machines or your less compound movements, things like that. And 5x5 will work for anything, right? You can use it for arm curls if you wanted to. I don't recommend that, but you could, right? If that's what you want to do, if you're really trying to build that strength. But that programming from a pro's perspective can be very effective. It can also, again, effective in terms of the result you can get because of the intensity that you're applying there. But also it's cool because you kind of know what you're doing and you don't have to add in a bunch of extra stuff. I think that's a pro to it too.
And I think probably the last thing I'd add is I do like, we were talking about like the intensity versus volume, but I think one of the benefits of this is, I can think a lot about like I always, see the teenager who's like trying to get to 225 on their bench. And a lot of times what they do is they like kind of pyramid up and then they hit this heavy weight, and just every week they're trying to hit this weight for 5 reps. Yep. I think the benefit from this is that you're getting, to really develop strength, especially when you're in adolescence and you're first doing this, you need like repeated bouts of a high intensity 100%. Effort. So you can't just hammer like, okay, I tried to hit this one set of 225 for 5 or whatever, getting to that and expect to continue to get growth or strength progress. Like you need these repeated bouts, which the 5x5 forces that.
Exactly. The other thing just to be aware of before we cut this off is, if you're doing a 5x5 and you're working at the intensity levels you should be working at in order to benefit them the most, it's going to require that recovery time. Yep. So one of the things I do like about it is if you are limited on frequency of days, during the week that you can't get your workouts done. If you got 3 5x5s done in a week, you're getting that work done, right? Yeah. Versus, if I had time to do full body and split that up multiple days per week and hit those same muscle groups, same joint movement patterns or whatever that I'm trying to hit multiple days during the week, like a little bit here, then I wait a couple of days, I hit it again, same week. If you don't have that flexibility in your program, this is a good way to do it. I don't think it's something that you do all the time. I think you do it for periods of time, and you back off and you move into some other rep and set schemes. But I love 5x5s for a lot of reasons. I like them for beginners too. As long as we've got their movement down and they understand what they're supposed to be doing and they can handle the intensity. But for a lot of new people coming in, like that just don't have that intestinal fortitude to get through or the capacity. Capacity to get through 10 reps, give them 5 with some intensity, 5x5 with intensity, can be really effective for them. And they again, it doesn't get in their head. And then you can move on to other things. Like I only see this client 2 times a week, man, that's not a lot of times. They could probably use some more frequency. I have to make the most out of this quote unquote hour that I have to work with them. I'm going to give them a 5x5 at the beginning. We're going to roast them, and I'm going to give them that big compound movement that's going to hit as much as I can in that amount of time. Then I can focus on some of these other things that they need to focus on. How can you boost your immune system? Good question. this comes up a lot. I mean, right now the nasties are going around again.
Oh,
I don't
for
know.
sure.
It's weird. Like we just came out of March. We're in April, and
Seasons changing. That's when it tends to happen.
Yeah. Yep. So boosting your immune system. I think there's some foundational principles here, and there's probably a few add-ons. Steven, you wanna tackle this one?
Yeah, I would say everybody's mind always jumps to supplements. I feel like that is, especially in the last 5 years, everybody thinks about what supplements can I take to boost my immune system. I would say, number one, you just need to stick to the fundamentals of diet, of exercise, the boring things, so that the system is operating at full capacity. And by proxy or by definition, you will have a stronger immune system. When I think about immune system, though, I think about resilience, and I actually think about exposure and exposure to stressors, things that are called hormetic stressors, the type of thing that is what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Mm-hmm. So that might be a little bit of a left turn from what people may think about when it comes to building a stronger immune system. And it could be as simple as going out into nature frequently. Like somebody who has allergy issues, I know that might be like that sounds like a nightmare, but exposing yourself to pathogens will allow your body to adapt to them. So I think, again, especially in the last 5 years, where we have individuals going to extreme lengths to avoid exposure to anything by any means possible, you're actually making your immune system weaker. You're actually making your immune system worse. You're doing it a disservice. It's similar to, if you have you have pain while you're doing squats, and so I don't squat ever. You're never going to get any stronger at it. So when it comes to boosting your immune system, you can take the supplements, you can take the zinc, the N-acetylcysteine, the vitamin C, some of these different adaptogenic herbs and things that you hear about. Ashwagandha, rhodiola, all those types of things. But aside from just handling the fundamentals of diet and nutrition and making sure that you're getting in adequate nutrients, adequate calories, all of your your micronutrients, also exercising, doing some type of hormetic stressor like a sauna or a cold plunge, those things can be helpful. And then just getting out and being exposed, frankly, to crowds, to nature, to things that will force your body to adapt and therefore build your immune system.
Love it.
Yeah, I love it too. I think that it's interesting, certainly like during the winter months, people attribute like the seasons are changing, like you said, or the temperature's changing, whatever. And this is the reason I've gotten sick or I got the head cold or whatever else. I think what people also lose sight of is the different environments they put themselves in. Like they're visiting with family, right? They're going and they're getting quote unquote locked down in a house or a cabin or something for the holidays with the in-laws and the rest of the family that's come from somewhere else that bring their filthy little children, they're just germ carrying.
Petri dishes.
Yeah, germ carrying or whatever. And everybody's in the same environment. So they're exposed to these new things. They get on airplanes and they're traveling, they're in airports and stuff like that. Look, we live on a planet and we live in a world where you're going to get sick. Like things are going to happen. Yeah. But the exposure piece, I think, is important. I think people take that, they don't account for that. One, in exposing yourself pre any of this stuff, and then what they've actually been exposed to, in these acute situations, the travel and the things that happen. And other things that happen with that are usually your sleep patterns get disrupted. Usually your exercise pattern
I didn't mention the sleep component. That's another fundamental that you can't forget about.
Yeah, that's when your nutrition, structure kind of gets broken down a little bit. All of those things are contributing factors.
Yeah, I was going to say, when there's the change of seasons, there's also sometimes, a change in what's happening within your life. So, for some individuals, it's like there's a de-stress period. So like you're working, and you're at this capacity where there's so much stress. And then when your system down regulates, and if you haven't been exposing yourself to certain types of, environments and those types of things, then your body all of a sudden becomes sick. Yep. So, and it gets tired and then it's an opportunity for your body to recover. So I think there's also something to be said as far as, in the change of seasons or in the change of seasons of life as far as what's happening.
The exposure piece, there's actually been a lot of studies done on this. I got into this for a little while because I thought it was fascinating, particularly on immune systems and the gut biome, but also the natural biome that exists on our body, skin, like on our skin and things like that. So a couple things. One, there was a study that was done with kids that grew up on farms, right, and versus kids that grew up in the city or like more of a rural environment, like a suburban environment, and the kids that grew up on farms and around livestock and were out in, the fields, right, or out in nature and the environment with the pollens and all the things that existed there, had healthier immune systems as they got older, and maybe they got sick a few times when they were a kid or whatever, but those are building antibodies and building a resistance to a lot of that stuff when they were kids. But as they get older, there's a less propensity for that, and obviously health outcomes there are largely dependent on what your state of health is, right? If you're overweight, you don't exercise, you eat like an asshole, all those things, those are contributing factors too. But that was an interesting one. The other one, not to be too graphic, and that is there's a huge camp where during childbirth, so versus cesarean versus vaginal births. And so there are doctors out there, there are physicians out there that will, when you go through the vaginal canal through birth, you are exposed to all of mom's microbiome beyond what you were already exposed to, right? And so that happens on the outside of the skin. It gets around your mouth, it gets around your eyes, it gets around your nose, it goes onto your skin. And that helps start to form the microbiome that your body will now be living with, which has a lot to do with your immune system and how your body deals with different things. And so if you were born cesarean, you didn't get that, right? So what they actually do is they actually swab mom and they'll rub that all over baby, nose, mouth, eyes, skin, whatever, just to expose them to that bacteria that exists there, and that basically that biome, so that the baby is getting that. And there are studies that show that those babies tend to have a better immune system over the longer period of time. Last thing I'll say about this, just a personal anecdote, is like my oldest, when she was like in her first year of life, dude, she was sick all the time, but she was also being exposed to a lot of things. Within the first year, she was already like in a daycare situation. It was like another mom who had another child that was about the same age. They had dogs and cats, and they had an outside area where they had, some chickens and stuff like that. And so it was a different environment than what we lived in. And she got sick quite frequently. There was a lot of upper respiratory stuff that she seemed to have. It was a real bummer. It was like, damn, this kid's miserable, right? Like, not miserable to me, but miserable. She's always got green shit coming out of her mouth and, or out of her nose, and she's coughing and sneezing, and maybe she's got a fever or whatever else. That was very stressful for me as a parent, because not that I thought she was going to die or anything, terrible was going to happen to her, just that I hated seeing my kid sick, right? And I also hated having to take time off work and, not be able to take her to the daycare when she was sick, and that's inconvenient. And I think a lot of parents, early on, they're like, they want to protect their kids from that. So they don't want to put them in those environments. And then when those things do happen and it becomes to, kind of impact life, and work and the things, and that's tough, kids up sick, they're up all night, they're miserable. And that means parents are up all night and they're having to deal with that. They start to kind of retract and don't want to expose their kids to stuff. I can tell you this, that kid was sick a lot in year one. Never got sick after that. Never. I mean, the occasional cold or flu, but never like anything gnarly. And even to this day, rarely gets sick as a young adult. So again, that's anecdotal, but the point being there is, I think, as you're approaching things, for your own immune system, think about the exposures that you are or aren't getting. Don't reach for a pill, a tablet, a capsule, or whatever else. However, there are things that, have some promising, research around them in terms of what to do. But once you're sick, right? So, once that immune system has been compromised, the main things that you can do are making sure you're eating right? You're hydrating correctly. You may be onboarding a few extra things. We've talked about that on the show before, and you're getting plenty of sleep, right? And you're just allowing your body to fight through it. That's a natural part of being a human being. So the real answer to that is get those exposures, right? And stay healthy, right? Exercise, eat right, sleep right, do those basic things. Yeah, just stress management. That'll usually keep you in a good spot. I mean, if you just think about your friends, those that are more physically fit, that pay closer attention to the things that we just talked about, are they sick more or less than your friends that don't? I know what that answer is for me. Think about that. How can you use isometric exercises to enhance your gains? I would assume this is like with regard to like increasing or maintaining muscle mass in the work that you're putting in the gym, and the benefits of using isometric exercise for this. So I think first we kind of just give a brief description or a definition of what isometrics are.
Well, so I actually have a lot to say about this because I do think that these are really underutilized for a lot of people, for the average gym goer, for the person trying to get into the gym, and then for performance as well. Isometrics, like in and of itself, is basically like holding a specific position in a joint angle with tension. So it could be like holding, some people think of something like a plank, like holding an isometric.
Like a wall squat.
Like a wall squat, but then it can be utilized for like holding in like the bottom of a lunge or something like that. Diving a little bit deeper into it, there's called overcoming isometrics, and there's things that are also called yielding isometrics, where overcoming isometrics, that kind of, I think, has a big place for some performance and for some strength and muscle gain. That's really where you're trying to maximize output to something that is basically like an immovable object or immovable for you in that position.
Yep.
Yeah. Or there's also like a yielding isometric, where that's more something where it's like either with low load, your body weight, and that's more for like the endurance side of things. So I think for someone who's actually like getting into the gym, who's wanting to build their strength and performance, an isometric can be a great way to establish control in a movement that's maybe a little too challenging. Like a super common application that I use isometrics for people who are just getting into the gym is like in a lunge pattern, which can be really hard for a lot of people to maintain. So really putting them in like the mid-range of a split squat of a lunge and holding that for duration. One is a great way to establish endurance there, establish control, allow them to feel tension in the right muscles. It's a great way to work on mobility and even like building connective tissue stiffness, tendon stiffness. So that's on this yielding isometric is a great way, again, for all those things, whether it's for your getting into the gym or for the person who's like also wanting to do things like recovery or other. It's
a really good confidence builder, I think, for
sure.
your individual who's coming in the gym. And the other thing is, too, it's not going to make them very sore.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and that's another thing for a new individual coming to the gym is that you want them to come back and they want to feel successful. You want them to feel successful. And so if they're leaving every time and they're feeling sore, especially with something like a lunge, then that can be deflating.
For sure. Yeah. And so that's where I think like it can be utilized for that, where you're not going to be super sore from it, but you are going to feel engagement and build confidence in positions. But then even for like an athlete or someone trying to build strength, it can be a good way for like on maybe your off day for some recovery or if there's a position that you feel weak in like your squat, like also working that. That's a big application. But then even on the overcoming isometrics, which this is used more in like the athletic performance side of things a lot, but a lot of people, the average gym goer doesn't use this. But basically like a good example is like setting up a bar under a rack under the safety pins, where in like your mid-range of your deadlift or like a hinge pattern, and you hold for maximal effort for 3 to 5 seconds or 5 to 10 seconds, and you really work as long as you can. This is a great way, like, again, it doesn't lead to too much soreness, but it has a high neural output for your body. So it teaches your body to really, really, really push. And you can either do that to be paired with a strength movement, be paired with a power movement, or just a great like in-season way for an athlete to utilize this to work on their high outputs without the heavy stimulus or stress of CNS, right? So that's a great also application for that as well.
Yeah, so for people that maybe didn't pick that up, so what you were talking about, there's the squat and the pin squat, where you've got the safety pins. So the bar's resting on a set of safety pins, right? And then just above that, right, at the level that of whatever range you're trying to train. So let's say it's the mid point of that squat. When you get underneath that bar, it's going to hit the top set of safety pins, and you're not going to be able to move it. It's immovable. So what you're doing is you're creating tension in a static position. So there's no gliding and sliding happening, through the muscle fibers or whatnot. And what you're doing is, again, the important thing, I think that the big takeaway here is the neural drive that gets created, which creates all kinds of things without taking away from the energy systems from like a central nervous system perspective. So you're not getting a huge stressor. So that was a really good case for kind of places to put that in. It's not sexy. It looks a little funky. And, I think when you look at in the world of human performance or athletic performance, where you'll see this being done is more in like contrast type training, where they will be using some of this plus that strength movement plus a power movement in the same movement pattern. So you're creating the drive. Then you hit the stimulus with the full barbell squat or whatever movement you've chosen, and then you go into like a broad jump or a box jump or something like that. So that's usually where you see it coupled or paired. It's not super sexy, and I think it's pretty misunderstood, because for a long time we heard, Isometrics don't do anything for you. There's nothing there because again, there's no gliding and sliding, so there's no crossover of myosin and actin and all the stuff that's going on at the cellular level. But the truth behind it is that's not what we should be focused on. We should be focusing on what's happening neurally. So huge application for that. And I love what you said about the newbie, right? The person that's coming in to build some strength, right? Build some confidence and build some endurance, some resiliency but more importantly, like understanding what they should be feeling so that they drive that mind-muscle connection to when they are doing this movement and through a full range of motion, loaded or unloaded or with body weight or whatever, they know what to be focused on, and which I think is a huge missing piece for a lot of people walking into programs. Like, this is the exercise I do, but I don't know how this should feel or what I should be focusing on here. And so all of those things kind of come together in some of those isometric patterns. I love that. What's this I hear about microdosing your workouts? I love this topic, actually. So microdosing, like when people think of that, they might be thinking like intaking like a substance or whatever. When we're talking about microdosing mushrooms or acid or whatever else.
Ketamine.
Yeah, ketamine. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of benefits to all those things. So that's another podcast for another day. Microdosing your workouts. So I love this topic because I think it's very applicable and relevant to a lot of people for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
So really what we're talking about is basically chopping down your workout time for whatever the reasons might be. And I think there's a lot of reasons why people would want to do this, or more specifically have to do this.
Yep.
So I think traditionally people go in and they think about, I need to be in the gym for about an hour to an hour and a half, somewhere in there. I need to hit all of these things while I'm in here. And that's good. We know that works. Within there, you need to be very organized in how you're putting that together so that you're getting the maximum benefit out of the work that you're putting in. And obviously, we start with a full tank, and by the end of our workout, we have less of a full tank. We don't necessarily want to run it to empty, but we're talking about energy systems. We're talking about neural drive. We're just talking about our focus, our intestinal fortitude, and all the other things that are happening in life, right? And then there's a recovery that has to happen after that. And then when's the next bout of exercise? Like, am I recovered enough, or have I recovered properly in order to now enter my next bout of exercise or my next athletic endeavor, or whatever it is that I'm training for, and still be able to perform at a high level? Microdosing your workouts, or what you might hear referred to as like trigger sessions or micro sessions, can be extraordinarily beneficial for folks that are in some of these certain circumstances. So let's talk about it.
Well, and I think that's initially too, like, I think so many people, and I can definitely think that I was in that camp and they still have that mindset a lot of like, if I can't get my hour and a half in, there's basically no point.
Right.
And so I think that leaves a lot on the table. One, just from getting the work in, but then there is actually, arguments to say that there might be more benefits to the micro workouts. Like, for example, like you said, like if you do your squats, and let's say like you want to do a micro workout and you have a home gym and you're working from home and you can kind of break up the day. By the time you do your squats, even if you get to your third or fourth exercise, maybe you're kind of tired. Maybe your performance is going down on that too. So one of the arguments is if you split them up every couple hours, and you're kind of just moving throughout the day, you go do some work and then come back, maybe you have more energy to hit those pull-ups more effectively than you did as well. So from a performance standpoint, it's a great way to be utilized to manage that. I think it also, another argument is like, if you're doing them more throughout the day, it can be a great benefit for someone who is super sedentary. It's a great way to like break up your sitting time, get your body, get some blood flow, get some things moving. There's a lot of applications, again, for like these maximal strength things that you can just get the main movements in, and that's definitely better than nothing.
Yep.
There's also benefits for like recovery, like these small sessions on your off days, like lighter stuff, band work, different things that can also help a lot with your recovery. I think a lot of people, we preach recovery, which is important. It is super important, but a lot of recovery isn't just passive. Like even things like our lymphatic system needs stimulus to drain out waste products in our recovery. So there is those benefits of going for a walk, but then even sometimes, but even more local recovery can be getting blood flow to specific muscles and tissue. So I think that's another application. I think it's the argument again is just of getting movement, getting things in that a lot of times like, hey, I don't have time for my hour and a half workout, but I'm going to at least get my squats in. And there's even been some cool data from even like improving VO2 max and cardiorespiratory fitness of like even that little aspect of like every time you go up to your stairs, sprinting up the stairs, that actually can have an impact on your cardiorespiratory fitness, which again, people think is very small, but those things add up more and more and more. And I mean, these are just kind of some of the things. I actually wrote an article, I think it was probably like 2.5 years ago, really breaking down like the different benefits and the different applications and how you can utilize this in your own training, whether it's like the super micro of running up the stairs, let's say, I guess the medium micro of like doing a 20-minute band workout for recovery, or even like, I guess the bigger micro of like the idea of you can split up, like do your squats in the morning. And then if you have time, do your ancillary stuff later in the day. And you maybe have more energy and output for those exercises than you would if you like, I'm just going to try to hit my arms at the end of my upper body day. But it's like, what are you really doing? Yeah, what are you really doing on that? Yeah. So there's lots of application.
Yeah. I like the last one in particular, just that, like you're finding a crunch in time here. And a lot of people will throw their hands up when things get really busy. But if they could just do like that main sequence that was at the front end of that workout, maybe it's okay to miss the other stuff. Or maybe you can take those other 2 or 3 sequences and then divide them up through, and the other workouts through the week. So you're hitting the things you need to hit. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever micro means for you. I would say as you're starting to get up towards 30 minutes, you can get a lot of work done in 30 minutes. I don't know if that qualifies as micro. I think that's relative to how long your workouts typically take you and how much volume and intensity you're trying to get in there. But yeah, you're kind of talking about like doing double days. I tell you where this really works well for people. So working with populations that have like kind of a, I guess like a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a shift work, but more specifically, like their schedule can kind of vary. Like it's unpredictable. Sorry, simple word couldn't bring it to the front of my brain there, but unpredictable. Like we work with a lot of like when I work with in extremist performance, we work with guys that get called out to various things in law enforcement. Like a lot of these part-time SWAT guys are working, or full-time SWAT guys are working in units where, man, their schedule could be wildly different from day to day. They may go out to something, they may be there for 8 hours sitting, right, doing nothing. And then they come back and they're probably exhausted. They probably haven't had a lot to eat yet, or, or whatever else. And they had this workout plan, but the call out got them, ate that up, right? Yeah. So, you could put in a 20-minute session there of, just hit some specific things, just be really intentional with that and still get a ton of benefit out of that. That's one application. The other really great application, I think if you talk to a lot of strength and conditioning coaches that work at in the collegiate level, they're finding that these things can be very beneficial for a couple of reasons. One, because of the time constraints that exists around all the things that a student athlete has to do and all the things that coaches have to do. Oftentimes they're coaching different teams during the same time. And they know they need to get these guys through or these athletes through and get some very specific things done. And there's always a time restriction there and with the requirements that exist. So the other thing that happens is if you're getting them in there for an hour and a half and they have all these other things to do, both athletically as well as in life, they get sore, like after an hour and a half, and they're not recovered, right? So you can mitigate a lot of that and make sure that they're coming back fresh and ready to go with more of these micro-dosed workouts. The other thing is you're not asking an athlete or somebody to have to think about too many things, right? Yeah. That can be a little daunting, right? Like I'm at the beginning of my workout, I'm tired, right? I don't have a lot of time, yet I have all this to get accomplished. And that takes you out of maybe the mindset you need to be in to get the most out of what you're doing there. And it's totally okay to break that up. I mean, the data will show you that like whether you took your workout for the day and you split it into 3 different workouts, one early morning, one midday, and one afternoon versus the one that you do for an hour and a half. So you did like 3 30-minute workouts, whatever, and you're really focused. The results that people get from that can often be better because they're coming back fresh, ready to go. And again, they could kind of recharge the batteries. And they're not as sore going into the following workouts. So the recovery time's better.
Yeah. And I think for the average general population person who's just working like a typical job is, there's a lot of data with like cognitive function following exercise, or even like, if you have that kind of afternoon crash, instead of reaching for that coffee, like getting some movement, getting some blood flow, like you might not even need to be more caffeinated, you might just need to move a little bit. And so it can also be a great way to kind of titrate movement throughout your day. So super applicable for that person.
Yeah, without getting too deep in the weeds, there's hormone response that happens during that time when you do work out in terms of chasing that cortisol response, the release of growth hormone, testosterone, and things like that. So there again, without majoring in the minors there, and those things are very important. But at the end of the day, like, look, divide it up, like figure it out. Like, and again, if you have that 3 or 4 sequence workout that you're doing, doing one in the morning or a portion of it and then saving the rest for later, which requires a little less intensity, maybe a little less CNS stimulation. You've given your time in between to hit your anabolic window with your protein shake after, and get your nutrition in and also break away from whatever the mundane challenges are of the work day or, the things that you're trying to manage in life. It can keep you kind of up. To your point, that might be your caffeine, right? That might be your pre-workout, solution is, I can get in here, I can really get this done. I feel great coming out. Usually after I'm done working out, like I'm tired, I feel exhausted, but I feel good. And there's a hormone response that happens there, and I can leverage that into the next workout. But a couple key points. One, if you're finding yourself short on time, look at microdosing your workouts, right? Yes, you may cut some things out, but the things that you do to make those count, stick to the bigger, heavier, or more compound lifts, those kind of things. And then you can kind of save the ancillary stuff for later. It's also like if you those bigger compound movements require access to a gym that you're a member of or a facility that you're a member of, but you can get some stuff done at home, right? You have some dumbbells there or whatever, some bands or whatever you have at home. That's an easy way to do is like, I don't have a lot of time. I have to get into the gym, make the gym time count. And then later in the day, you can hit these things for another 10 or 20 minutes, like your arms and your abs or whatever it is that you don't need access to all these other things. So just a couple different ways to apply all this stuff. I love this. I love the micro dose type of routine. I often do it. Like I'm horrible at this. I'll get stuck staring at my computer. I'll get into something. I'll get hit in the head with something else. And the next thing I know, I'm eating into my workout time and just going out on the floor and getting something done, right? Something's better than nothing, but really focused on, well, I can't do all of this today. What are the 2 things I'm going to do? Right? I pick the 2 things that are most beneficial for me. I knock those out. I walk out of here feeling satisfied. I got it done, right? It's not how I operate all the time, but if that's what you need to do, just understand that you can get a tremendous amount of benefit out of quote unquote microdosing your workouts.